The morning of her wedding, Catherine Hale stood in front of the mirror and looked at what had been done to her. Her hair, which had been, until the previous evening, the one thing about herself she had always considered beautiful, was gone. Not trimmed, not shaped, shorn, uneven at the nape where the scissors had been hasty, ragged above the ears where they had been careless, the kind of cut that is done quickly by hands that are not trying to do it well and know they don't have to. The Duchess had held the scissors herself. She had smiled the entire time. She had called it tradition. Catherine stood in front of the mirror for a long time. She looked at the woman looking back at her, the bare neck, the uneven ends, the face that was the same face it had always been, and somehow, in this light on this morning, looked older than it had the night before. She thought about the carriage waiting downstairs. She thought about the church 3 miles down the road. She thought about Edward Ashworth, 6th Duke of Ashworth, who was at this moment presumably dressing for a wedding he believed was proceeding entirely as planned. She put on her wedding dress. She went downstairs, not because she had no choice. She had choices. She had always had choices. She simply had not, until last night, understood how few of them she had been using. This morning she was going to use one. She was going to walk into that church with her head up and her neck bare and her hair exactly as it had been left, and she was going to look at every person who looked at her, and she was going to understand, from what she saw on their faces, exactly what she was dealing with. Information, she had decided somewhere between the scissors and the mirror, was the beginning of everything. She was going to start collecting it. The invitation had arrived 6 weeks before the wedding. A note from the Duchess of Ashworth, handwritten, correct, warm in the practiced way of a woman who has written thousands of correct, warm notes and knows precisely how warm to make each one. It said that it was tradition in the Ashworth family for the bride to spend the eve of the wedding at Ashworth Manor, so that the wedding morning could begin with the full household together. It said that a room had been prepared. It said that Catherine would be most welcome. Catherine had read it twice. She had shown it to her mother, who had said it was a lovely gesture. She had shown it to her father, who had said it was perfectly standard for families of that kind. She had folded it and put it in her writing desk and thought, with the practical instinct she had developed over 24 years of navigating the world with more intelligence than resources. I don't know this woman well enough to know if this is kind. But she had gone. Because you go. Because the wedding is in 6 weeks and the Duke is a man she has agreed to marry and his mother is a woman she is going to live beside for the foreseeable future, and you don't begin by refusing gestures you can't prove are unkind. You go. You watch. You learn. Ashworth Manor was everything she had expected and several things she hadn't. Large, she had expected large. The Ashworth estate was one of the oldest in the county and carried the particular weight of land that has been held by the same family for so many generations that it has stopped feeling like property and started feeling like geography. The drive was long. The house at the end of it was pale stone, symmetrical, the kind of house that has been added to and modified over centuries and has somehow remained coherent, like a sentence that has been edited many times and still says the same thing. What she hadn't expected was how alive it felt. Fires in every room. Flowers, real ones, not the formal arrangements of a house being presented for inspection, but the loose, generous kind that suggested someone had gone into a garden and cut what was blooming without worrying too much about the result. The smell of something good from the direction of the kitchens. A dog asleep in the entrance hall who opened one eye at Catherine and then closed it again, satisfied. It felt, she thought, like a home. She filed this carefully. Homes had people in them who had made them that way. She wanted to know which person this was. The Duchess met her in the entrance hall. Margaret Ashworth was 61 years old and looked, at first glance, like a woman who had always been comfortable. Not pretty, that was not the word. Pretty was for girls, but handsome in the way of someone who has occupied their face with confidence for long enough that the confidence has become part of the face. She was dressed simply, which Catherine noted. A woman who dressed simply at home and well in public was a woman who understood the difference between performing and being, and knew when each was required. She took Catherine's hands. "My dear," she said, warm, genuine sounding, "I am so glad you've come." She looked at Catherine the way you look at something you have been anticipating, not assessing exactly, but attending to, taking in. Catherine smiled. "Thank you for having me," she said. She looked back. She attended to the Duchess in return. She saw intelligence, certainly. Control, the kind so habitual it had become invisible, the way a hand that is always steering doesn't look like it's steering. Warmth that was present and real, and also, underneath it, purposeful. She filed all of this. She smiled. The evening was pleasant. This was the word Catherine kept arriving at, turning over, finding insufficient but accurate. Pleasant. Dinner was good. The conversation was easy. The Duchess was a skilled conversationalist, curious without being invasive, amusing without performing, the kind of company that makes an evening pass quickly and leaves you feeling you have been well hosted without being quite able to identify any specific thing that made it so. There were no other guests, just Catherine and the Duchess in the small dining room off the main hall, with the good candles and the good wine and the fire doing its warm work in the corner. Edward was not there. "He's at the Pembrokes for the evening," the Duchess said when Catherine arrived and the absence became apparent. "Tradition. The night before the wedding, bride and groom sleep under separate roofs. He'll be at the church tomorrow, of course." A pause, then the warm laugh. "Rather a long night for him, I expect. He's not very patient." Catherine had smiled at this. She had also thought, "I have never seen any evidence of Edward being impatient, but I have not, in the months of our engagement, seen very much evidence of anything. He is a man who reveals himself slowly." Whether this was character or strategy she had not yet determined. After dinner, they sat in the drawing room. The Duchess talked about the wedding, who would be there, the arrangements, the flowers Catherine had chosen, which were apparently causing some consternation with the head gardener who had strong opinions about seasonal appropriateness. She was funny about it, self-deprecating. She said, "I've learned in 30 years of managing this house that there are precisely 3 people whose opinions about flowers must never be overridden: the gardener, the cook, and the woman who is being married. Everyone else can be ignored." Catherine laughed. She was, she noticed, genuinely enjoying herself. She was also, she noticed, slightly tired. The journey, the evening, the particular effort of being new in a place and attending carefully to everything. "You should sleep," the Duchess said. "Tomorrow is a long day." "Yes," Catherine agreed. She stood. The Duchess stood with her, which was correct, and rang for the maid to show Catherine to her room, which was also correct, and walked with her as far as the foot of the stairs, which was warm. "I'll come and see you in the morning," the Duchess said. "Before you dress. There's something I'd like to do if you'll allow it." "Of course," Catherine said. She did not ask what. Later she would think about this, the not asking. The way the warmth of the evening and the good wine and the practiced ease of the Duchess's company had made the not asking feel like graciousness rather than oversight. She went upstairs. She went to bed. She slept. The Duchess came at 7. Catherine was awake. She was always awake early, earlier than was strictly necessary, the habit of someone who likes the morning before it becomes anything. She was sitting in the chair by the window in her dressing gown, watching the grounds come into focus in the early light, when the knock came. "Come in," she said. The Duchess entered alone. No maid, no tray, no morning tea, none of the apparatus of a morning visit. Just the Duchess in a dark dress, her hair already up, holding something at her side. Catherine looked at what she was holding. Scissors. Long-handled, the kind kept sharp. "I won't take long," the Duchess said. She was smiling. The same smile as last night, warm, practiced, genuine-looking. In this family, the night before the wedding or the morning of which we've always found more practical, the bride's hair is cut. She said it the way you say things that are obvious, things that go without saying. It's very old. It means she enters the marriage as herself, not as society has dressed her, not as the world expects her to look, but as she simply is, stripped of all that. The smile warmed further. It's rather beautiful when you understand it. Catherine looked at the scissors. She looked at the Duchess's face. She thought very clearly, this is a lie. She thought there is no tradition. Or if there is a tradition, it is not this one, not these scissors at 7 in the morning with no maid present and no warning given last night. She thought, she is waiting to see what I do. The room was quiet. Outside the grounds were gray-green in the early light, the dew still heavy on the grass, a bird doing something insistent in the oak tree by the wall. Catherine looked at the scissors for one more second. And she would think about this moment for a long time afterward, would turn it over and examine it and try to understand what had made her do it. She made a decision. Not the decision that fear would have made. Not the decision that pride would have made. The decision that information required. I want to see, she thought, exactly what this woman will do when I let her. She sat down in the chair. She said, "Of course." The Duchess moved quickly. That was the first thing Catherine noted, the efficiency of it. No ceremony, no ritual, none of the slowness that an actual tradition would have carried. She moved like a woman who had something to accomplish before she was interrupted, and the scissors were cold against Catherine's neck, and the sound they made was the sound of something being decided, and it took less than 2 minutes, which was itself the information Catherine needed. 2 minutes, she thought, as the hair fell. A real tradition would have taken longer. She sat very still. She kept her eyes forward on the window, on the gray-green grounds and the oak tree and the persistent bird. She did not look at the Duchess's face, because she knew what she would find there, and she did not want to give her the satisfaction of being looked at. She sat still, and she felt the scissors, and she thought, note everything. The unevenness, the speed, the deliberate roughness at the nape. She could feel the difference. The places where the scissors had been careful and the places where they had not, and the places where they had not were not accident. Note it, she thought, all of it. When the scissors stopped, the Duchess stepped back. There, she said, the warm voice, the warm smile. You look, a pause, honest. Catherine turned her head slightly. She looked at the mirror on the wall, not standing, not making it a performance, just the slight turn of someone checking. She saw. She turned back to the window. Thank you, she said. Her voice was entirely steady. The Duchess left. Catherine sat in the chair for a while after she had gone. She looked at her hands in her lap. She looked at the hair on the floor, more than she had realized, more than it had felt like while it was happening. A considerable amount of hair lying on the dark floorboards in the early morning light. She thought about what she had just allowed. She thought about why. She thought about the smile and the scissors and the 2 minutes and the word honest said in the voice of a woman who had just done something dishonest and found it satisfying. She thought about Edward at the Pembrokes' house, presumably sleeping, unknowing. She thought about the church 3 miles down the road. She thought about the dog in the entrance hall and the fires in every room and the flowers cut without worrying about the result and all the warmth of the previous evening that had been real. She was certain it had been real. It was too consistent, too present, too much of a piece with itself to be entirely manufactured. And she thought, this house is a home, and this woman has been its only inhabitant for 30 years. And last night she was kind to me, and this morning she took scissors to my hair and called it tradition. And she is waiting, right now, to see what I do with that. She stood up. She went to the dressing table. She looked at herself fully, directly, without flinching. The bare neck, the uneven ends, the ears, the face above it all, which was her face, which had not changed. She thought, you have 2 choices. You can walk into that church looking like what she made of you, or you can walk into that church looking like what you decided. She picked up the small brush on the dressing table and smoothed what remained into the best order it would go. She thought, those are not different choices. What she made of you and what you decide on this morning are the same thing. She cut your hair. You are going to walk in anyway, and you are going to watch every face in that room, and you are going to understand exactly what you married into, and then you are going to deal with it. She set the brush down. She rang for her maid. She put on her wedding dress. She did not look at the hair on the floor again. But she picked up a single strand, one long strand, the longest she could find, and wrapped it carefully in her handkerchief and put it in the small bag she was carrying. Not for sentiment, for evidence. You never knew, she had learned from her father, who had been a practical man, when evidence would be useful. She went downstairs. The dog in the entrance hall opened both eyes this time. Catherine paused. She looked at it. It looked at her steadily, without alarm, the way dogs look at things they have already assessed and found acceptable. She thought, at least one creature in this house is being honest with me. She went to the carriage. She went to her wedding. She had let it happen. She had sat still and let the scissors do their work, not because she had no choice. Because she had decided, on a gray morning with hair on the floor and a bird in the oak tree and the smell of someone else's house around her, that the most dangerous thing she could do was let this woman believe she had won, and then prove, slowly and completely and without a single raised voice, that she hadn't. The scissors were the beginning. Catherine intended to be the end. The carriage ride to the church took 23 minutes. Catherine knew this because she counted, not the minutes exactly, but the landmarks. The gate at the end of the Ashworth Drive. The fork where the road divided toward the village. The stone bridge over the narrow river that ran brown and quick in the early spring. The line of elm trees that meant the church was coming. She counted them the way she counted everything on mornings that required steadiness. Methodically, without sentiment, as a way of keeping her attention on the immediate and factual rather than the anticipated and uncontrollable. The Duchess rode with her. This had not been discussed. It had simply occurred, the Duchess appearing at the carriage door in her wedding clothes, a dark plum that suited her, her own hair pinned perfectly, and settling into the seat across from Catherine with the ease of a woman taking her accustomed place. The maid had handed Catherine in first. The Duchess had followed. The carriage had moved. Catherine looked out the window. The Duchess talked. Not about the hair, not directly, not even adjacently. She talked about the wedding breakfast afterward, about a cousin who was traveling from Scotland and might be late, about the flower arrangements in the church which she had overseen personally, and which she hoped Catherine would find acceptable. She talked with the warm, easy fluency of last night's dinner, as though the morning had been entirely ordinary, as though the scissors were in their drawer and the hair was still on Catherine's head and everything was as it should be. Catherine listened. She said the correct things at the correct intervals, and she thought, she is watching me. Every word is watching me, and I am watching her, and neither of us is going to show anything in this carriage. Good, she thought. Let it be like that. The church was old, older than the Ashworth house, older than the title, the kind of building that had been there before the family and would be there after, its stone walls holding 3 centuries of Ashworth weddings and christenings and funerals, with the impartial patience of things that have seen too much to be surprised by any of it. The carriage stopped. Catherine could hear, even before the door opened, the particular murmur of a gathered crowd, the low, anticipatory sound of people who have arrived and are waiting for something to begin. The sound of occasion. She thought, in approximately 30 seconds I am going to step out of this carriage and every person in that churchyard is going to see my hair. She thought, good. She thought, let them. The footman opened the door. Catherine stepped down. The silence happened in a wave. Not complete silence. The churchyard was not a room. Sound didn't stop the way it does between 4 walls. But it moved outward from her in a ripple, the way a stone moves water. The people nearest her first, then those further back, conversations dying and restarting and dying again as people turned and saw and turned to the person beside them. Catherine walked steadily toward the church door. She kept her head up. She did not look at the ground. She did not look at any single face for long enough to make it an encounter. She looked forward past the gathered people at the church door, which was her destination, and which she intended to reach without any alteration of her pace or her expression. She was aware, in the way you are aware of weather, of what was happening around her. The whispers. Not cruel, not yet, not here in the churchyard with the wedding about to begin and the social requirement to be kind too strong to override, but present, audible, the specific whisper of people who are looking at something they did not expect and cannot yet account for. She heard from her left. Her hair, she heard from slightly behind her. Goodness. She heard, clearly and close, an older woman say to her companion in a voice that was almost indignant, "What has been done to that girl?" This last one Catherine filed with particular care. What has been done, not what has she done. The distinction mattered. The older woman, she did not look but filed the voice, the direction, the quality of the indignation, had assessed it correctly in 3 seconds. That was useful information about that woman. She reached the church door. Her father was there. He saw her, and his face did something that he could not control and did not try to, which was the one thing about her father that Catherine had always loved unconditionally. He was not a man who managed his face. What he felt arrived on it immediately and completely, without filter. What arrived now was shock, and then, moving across it too quickly to be stopped, a fury so clean and so total that it was almost beautiful. He knew. He had not been told. He had not expected it, but he looked at his daughter's hair and he knew, immediately, completely, without needing to be informed, what had happened and who had done it. His hands, Catherine noticed, were very still at his sides. The stillness of a man keeping himself in place by deliberate effort. "Catherine," he said. "Papa," she said. A pause, brief, complete, everything in it. He offered her his arm. She took it. They walked into the church. The church was full. 200 people, the Ashworth family, the Hale family, the county families who attended these things as a matter of social fabric, the neighbors and the distant relations, and the people whose connection to either family was tenuous enough that Catherine had not been entirely sure why they were invited and had understood upon asking that they simply were, that this was how it was done. 200 people, and Catherine walked up the aisle on her father's arm and felt the wave move ahead of her again, the same ripple as the churchyard, the conversations dying and the heads turning and the whispers beginning. She looked forward. She looked at the altar. She looked, because she could not look, at Edward. He was standing at the altar with his back partly to her, the standard position, the groom not turning until the bride is close, the convention of not looking until the moment requires it. But someone near him must have made a sound, or he must have felt the change in the room's attention, because he turned before she was halfway up the aisle. He turned and he looked at her. Catherine had been preparing herself, in the 40 steps between the church door and the halfway point, for what she might see on his face. She had considered the possibilities with the practical thoroughness she applied to unpleasant problems. She had considered, foreknowledge, the expression of a man who had been told what to expect and had composed himself accordingly, the controlled neutrality of someone performing surprise they do not feel. She had considered indifference, the possibility that he had known and had not thought it worth mentioning, had decided it was his mother's business and therefore not his, the expression of a man who has delegated and is not troubled by what the delegation produced. She had considered complicity of the comfortable kind, not planned, not desired, but enabled, the expression of a man who had known what his mother was capable of and had brought a woman into her reach anyway and had chosen not to think too hard about what that meant. She had been prepared for all of these. She had not been prepared for what she actually saw. Edward Ashworth's face, when he turned and saw his bride walking toward him in her wedding dress with her hair cut ragged above her ears and her neck bare and her head absolutely level, went through three things in rapid succession. The first was shock. Not performed shock, not the wide eyes and the parted mouth of someone executing surprise. The real kind, the kind that arrives before the person is ready for it, the kind that moves through the face like weather and is gone before it can be managed. Catherine had been watching faces her entire life, and she knew the difference between the two, and this was real. The second was something she had no immediate word for, a kind of comprehension, rapid and painful, the expression of a man who has just understood something he should have understood sooner and knows it. The third was, he looked at his mother. Just briefly, just a glance sideways to where the Duchess was taking her seat in the front pew. The glance lasted perhaps 1 second. His mother did not look back at him. She was arranging her gloves in her lap with the serene attention of a woman whose mind is entirely at rest. Edward looked back at Catherine. She had reached the altar. She was standing in front of him. She looked at his face, directly, completely, with the full attention she had been collecting and directing all morning, and she looked for the thing that would tell her what she most needed to know. Did you know? Not about last night. She already knew he hadn't known about last night. The shock had been real, she was certain of it. But did you know what she was? Did you know what you were bringing me into? Did you stand at this altar and know and come anyway and tell yourself it wasn't your business? She looked. She looked for a long time. He held her gaze, did not look away, did not manage his expression into something more comfortable, did not perform the assured calm of a duke at his own wedding. He looked back at her with the same unguarded thing he had not been able to control when he first turned, and in it she saw, alongside the shock, alongside the comprehension, something that was, she thought, the beginning of shame. Not guilt. Guilt was about actions. Shame was about understanding what the actions meant. He was beginning to understand what the actions meant. Good, she thought. That is the right place to start. She turned to face the altar. The vicar opened his book. The wedding began. Catherine said her vows clearly and at the correct pace, and with the correct expression. She had decided this in the carriage, the decision coming quietly and without drama. She was going to be impeccable today. Not because she owed anyone her best performance, because her best performance was her best weapon, and today was the opening move of something that was going to take longer than a morning. Edward said his vows. He said her name, Catherine, and his voice was steady, but she heard something in it that had not been in his voice in any of their prior conversations, in any of the correct, pleasant, somewhat distant interactions of their 6-month engagement. He sounded, she thought, like a man who meant what he was saying. She was not yet sure what to do with that. She filed it. When it was done and they turned to walk back down the aisle, Edward offered her his arm. She took it. They walked. The 200 people stood, and there was applause, genuine, warm, the sound of an occasion resolving into its expected form. And Catherine looked forward and walked at the correct pace and was aware, peripherally and precisely, of the faces they passed. Most of them were looking at her hair. Some with pity, some with confusion, some with the careful blankness of people who have understood something uncomfortable and are deciding not to show it. And some, a handful, the ones she filed most carefully, with something else. Something sharp and knowing, the expression of people who have seen this before or suspected this was possible and are watching to see what the young woman at the Duke's side is going to do about it. Those were the faces she wanted. Those were the people she was going to need. She noted each one. She walked on. Outside in the churchyard in the thin spring sunshine, she stood beside her husband for the first time and received the congratulations of 200 people, and she smiled, and she was gracious, and she remembered every face that had looked at her with that sharp, knowing expression. There were 7 of them. 7 was enough. 7 was, in fact, more than she had hoped for. The Duchess appeared at her elbow at some point during the receiving, materializing with the smooth ease of a woman who knows how to move through a crowd without appearing to navigate it. She took Catherine's hands again, as she had in the entrance hall the night before. "My dear," she said, the warm voice, the warm smile. "You look," a pause, "exactly as calculated as the one that morning. Radiant." Catherine looked at her. She smiled the correct, warm, gracious smile of a new bride receiving her mother-in-law's congratulations. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." The Duchess held her gaze for a moment. Something moved in it, just briefly, just a flicker, the faintest recalibration of a woman who had expected something other than this, and was not yet certain what to make of what she had received instead. Then the warm smile returned, complete and practiced. "Of course," the Duchess said. She moved on. Catherine turned to the next face, the next congratulation, the next correct smile. Beside her, Edward was very still for a moment. Then he leaned, almost imperceptibly, slightly toward her. He said nothing. But she felt it, the slight shift of his weight, the almost movement, the thing that was not quite a gesture and was more than an accident. She filed it. She smiled at the next face. She was, she thought, going to be very busy in the coming months. She found she did not mind at all. The wedding was over. The marriage had begun. The Duchess had smiled at her all day, and Catherine had smiled back warmly, graciously, without a single crack. Which was, she had decided somewhere between the elm trees and the church door, exactly how you begin. Not with anger, not with tears, with patience, and a very good memory. Ashworth Manor in the first weeks of marriage was exactly what Catherine had expected and nothing like what she had prepared for. She had prepared for hostility. She had prepared for the cold shoulder, the pointed exclusion, the small daily cruelties that a woman in the Duchess's position could deploy with perfect deniability. The kind of treatment that leaves no mark because each individual instance is too minor to name, and the accumulation of them is too diffuse to prove. She had prepared herself for this the way you prepare for whether you know is coming, practical, clear-eyed, dressed for it. What she had not prepared for was warmth. The Duchess was warm. Consistently, generously, inventively warm, warm at breakfast and warm at dinner, and warm in the drawing room in the evenings and warm when they passed each other in the corridors of the house that was technically Catherine's and functionally, in every way that mattered, the Duchess's. She asked Catherine about her preferences and remembered the answers. She introduced her to the neighboring families with language that was not merely correct but actively flattering. She deferred to her visibly on small matters, the arrangement of flowers in the hall, the timing of the afternoon tea, in ways that anyone watching would have taken as the natural generosity of a mother-in-law making room for a new bride. Anyone watching would have been wrong. Catherine watched. She understood within the first week what the warmth was. It was the same warmth as the dinner, the same warmth as the invitation, the same warmth as the scissors at 7 in the morning with the practiced smile and the 2 minutes of efficiency. It was warmth as management. The Duchess was not cruel to her. The Duchess was, Catherine searched for the right word and found it, occupied with her. Attentive in the way of a gardener who is attentive to a new plant, not because the plant matters in itself, but because the garden matters and the plant is in the garden, and what the plant does will affect the garden, and the gardener intends to be the one who decides what that effect will be. Catherine was in the Duchess's garden. The Duchess intended to be the one who decided what Catherine would do in it. This was, Catherine thought, going to be interesting. The house itself took her 2 weeks to fully map. Not the physical layout, that she had understood within 3 days, having walked every corridor and opened every door that was not locked and made note of the ones that were. The physical house was large but not complicated. The social house was another matter entirely. The social house was the Duchess. Every relationship in Ashworth Manor ran through her. The housekeeper, Mrs. Holt, efficient and loyal and 20 years in post, reported to the Duchess. The estate manager reported to the Duchess. The cook consulted the Duchess on menus. The gardener sought the Duchess's approval on seasonal plantings. The footmen looked to the Duchess when there was any ambiguity about how something should be done. This was not unusual for a household that had been run by the same woman for 30 years. It was, in fact, the natural consequence of 30 years of competent management, loyalty earned, systems built, the particular authority of someone who has never been wrong often enough to be doubted. What was unusual was how complete it was. There was no gap, no crack, no small domestic matter that had not been rooted through the Duchess for long enough that routing it any other way felt not just unfamiliar but somehow incorrect. Catherine stood in the middle of this one Tuesday morning, having attempted to discuss a menu change with the cook, and found herself gently, warmly, apologetically redirected. The Duchess usually prefers to, and she thought. She built this over 30 years. She built it so completely that no one inside it even sees it as a structure. They just see how things are. She thought, that is very good work. She thought, I am going to need to be patient. She thought, I am going to need to start somewhere small. It was Mrs. Webb who found her. Or rather, Catherine found Mrs. Webb in the technical sense. She was walking the East Corridor on a gray Thursday afternoon, mapping the final section of the house she hadn't fully attended to yet, when she noticed an open door and looked through it and found a small sitting room she hadn't known was there, and in it, an old woman mending something by the window. The woman looked up. Their eyes met. And Catherine saw, immediately and without question, the way you sometimes see things in faces before you have any reason to trust the seeing, that this woman was looking at her differently from everyone else in the house. Not the warm, managed attention of the Duchess, not the polite deference of the staff, not the careful neutrality of people who are watching to see which way things will go before they commit to a direction. This was recognition. The look of someone who has seen this before and is looking at the current version of it and is deciding something. Catherine stepped into the room. I don't think we've been introduced, she said. No, Your Grace, the woman said. She set her mending down. I'm Mrs. Webb. I was lady's maid to the late Duchess, the first one, that is. His late Grace's mother. I've been in this house since before Mr. Edward was born. Catherine looked at her. She thought, before Edward was born, before the current Duchess arrived. She thought, this woman has been here longer than anyone. She thought, she is looking at me like someone who has been waiting for a particular conversation, and is not certain it is going to come, and is deciding whether to begin it herself. May I sit down? Catherine said. Mrs. Webb gestured to the chair across from her. Catherine sat. They talked for an hour. Mrs. Webb did not volunteer everything at once. She was, Catherine quickly understood, a woman who had learned caution the way you learn it in a house where information is currency. Carefully, over time, with a precise understanding of what each disclosure cost and whether the cost was worth it. She talked first about the house, the history of it. The late Duke, Edward's father, dead 12 years, who had been, by Mrs. Webb's measured account, a man of large appetites and variable judgment who had nonetheless genuinely loved the estate and the people on it, who had been, in his way, a good duke if not a consistently good man. She talked about Edward as a boy, briefly, carefully, with the warmth of someone who had cared for him and the caution of someone who understood that she was talking to his wife. She talked about the late Duke's first wife. She said her name only once, Emma. Emma had come to Ashworth Manor at 22, the daughter of a good family fallen on difficult times, in an arrangement not entirely unlike Catherine's own. She had been, by Mrs. Webb's account, an intelligent woman, a warm woman, a woman who had come into the house with every intention of making it hers. The Duchess had been there. Not the Duchess as she was now. She had been younger than 45, in the full authority of a woman who has been the most important person in her world for 20 years and has no intention of stepping aside. And Emma had not understood in those first months what she was dealing with. She had taken the warmth at face value. She had trusted the deference on small matters. She had believed that the house was becoming hers because she was being allowed to think so. By the time she understood, it was too late. Not too late to leave. Emma had eventually left 3 years in quietly, without announcement, moving to a small house in the village where she had lived, as far as Mrs. Webb knew, ever since. But too late to fight. She had left because the alternative was to remain in a house where she was invisible in a way that no one outside could see, where every relationship had been quietly foreclosed, where she had found herself, after 3 years, completely alone in a room full of people. She was worn down, Mrs. Webb said, not cruelly, just worn like stone in water. You don't see it happening until the stone is smooth. Catherine listened to all of this. She asked, "Did anyone help her?" Mrs. Webb looked at her hands. "No," she said. "No one knew how." "Did she ask?" A pause. She didn't know she could. Catherine looked at the window. The gray afternoon outside. The grounds, bare and wet. The elm trees at the far edge of the park, standing in the particular stoic patience of things that have weathered many winters and expect to weather more. "Where is she now?" she said. 3 miles from here," Mrs. Webb said. "Linton Cottage, past the south gate. She never left the county." Catherine turned to look at her. She stayed. "She had nowhere else to go," Mrs. Webb said. "And I think," she paused, "I think she couldn't quite leave, even after everything. The house does that to people sometimes, gets into them." Catherine looked back at the window. She thought about a woman who had been worn smooth like stone in water, who had stayed 3 miles away for how many years? 10, 12. Close enough to see the chimneys of Ashworth Manor on a clear day, far enough to be forgotten. She thought, "I am not going to be forgotten," she thought, "but I need to understand what I'm dealing with before I can do anything about it." She turned back to Mrs. Webb. "You said the Duchess's power in this house has limits," she said. "Legal limits." Mrs. Webb looked at her sharply. "I haven't said that yet," she said. "No," Catherine said, "but you were going to." A long pause. Then Mrs. Webb smiled, small, private. The smile of a woman who has been waiting a long time to have this conversation, and is finding it more satisfying than she had expected. "There are documents," she said, "from when the late Duke died. The house, the estate, the management of the household, it passes to the Duke's wife. Not his mother, his wife." She paused. "The current Duchess manages this house by custom, by habit, by 30 years of everyone believing that this is simply how things are." Another pause. "Not by right." Catherine looked at her. "Does she know that I know this?" she said. "No," Mrs. Webb said. "No one has told you. I'm telling you now." "Why now?" Mrs. Webb looked at her steadily. "Because you came to church with your head up," she said. "Emma cried in the carriage." A pause. "I've been waiting 11 years for someone to come to that church with their head up." Catherine left the small sitting room an hour later with 3 things. The first was the name of the solicitor who had handled the late Duke's estate documents and who, Mrs. Webb believed, still held copies of the relevant papers. The second was Emma's address. Linton Cottage, past the south gate, 3 miles. The third was something harder to name, a quality of clarity, of confirmed direction, that she had been working toward since the morning of the scissors, and had not quite arrived at until now. She had been right about what she was dealing with. She had been right that it required patience and information, and the precise, careful building of something to replace what the Duchess had built. What she had not known until Mrs. Webb was that there was a foundation already there, that the house itself, legally, structurally, on paper, belonged to Catherine's position within it. The Duchess had built her empire on custom. Custom could be changed. That evening at dinner, the Duchess talked about a lunch she was planning for the following Wednesday, the neighboring families, the usual faces, the kind of event she had been hosting since before Catherine was born, and which she described, warmly and naturally and without any consultation, as our Wednesday lunch, the possessive pronoun folding Catherine in without offering her any actual role in it. Catherine listened. She said, "I'd love to help with the arrangements." The Duchess smiled. "Of course, my dear. I'll let you know how you can be useful." Catherine smiled back. She thought about useful. She thought about the documents in the solicitor's office. She thought about Emma at Linton Cottage, 3 miles away, worn smooth like stone in water. She thought, useful is not what I intend to be, but she said nothing. Not yet. She was building something. And the thing about building, the thing her father had taught her, the thing she had always known, was that you did not begin with the walls. You began with the ground. She was learning the ground. She was almost ready. The house was the Duchess's, in every way that people could see. But Catherine had found, in a small sitting room on a gray Thursday afternoon, the thing the Duchess had never thought to guard against, a woman who had been there before, and a woman who had arrived with her head up. The ground was shifting. The Duchess just didn't know it yet. The first real conversation happened on a Wednesday evening, 3 weeks into the marriage. Not the first conversation. They had been conversing since the engagement, correctly and pleasantly, the way two people converse when they are performing the appropriate relationship rather than inhabiting it. Catherine had learned, in 6 months of engagement and 3 weeks of marriage, that Edward Ashworth was a man who could sustain a conversation about almost anything for almost any length of time, without revealing a single thing about himself that he had not decided, in advance, to reveal. This had not been carelessness. She understood that now. It had been practice. The Wednesday evening began ordinarily enough. Dinner, the 3 of them, it was always the 3 of them, which was itself a thing Catherine had filed without yet addressing. The Duchess at the foot of the table, Edward at the head, Catherine between them in the geographic and social position of someone whose exact role in the household had not yet been determined, and who was therefore placed, by default, in the middle of everything and the center of nothing. The Duchess talked about the Wednesday lunch, which had been a success. She talked about a letter from a cousin. She talked about the East Garden Wall. Catherine noted this. The East Garden Wall had come up twice now in the Duchess's conversation, which meant it was something she intended to use at some point for something Catherine hadn't yet identified. Edward contributed where contribution was expected, and was otherwise quiet in the particular way he was quiet at dinner, present, attending, giving nothing. Catherine ate her soup and watched them both. After dinner the Duchess retired early. A headache, she said, with a warmth that made the headache sound like a small, charming difficulty rather than an inconvenience. She pressed Catherine's hand at the drawing-room door and told her she was a dear girl and left. The room was suddenly very quiet. Catherine sat with her embroidery, which she had brought as a prop and which she had no intention of actually doing, and looked at the fire. Edward sat across from her with a book he was not reading. The clock on the mantel did its steady work. After a while Edward said, "She planned it, didn't she?" Catherine looked up. He was looking at the fire, not at her. His face was in profile, and in the firelight she could see the particular quality of stillness she had observed at the altar, the stillness of a man keeping himself in place by deliberate effort. She considered her options. She could say, "I don't know what you mean." She could say, "The Duchess has been very kind." She could perform the expected confusion of a woman who has decided to pretend she has not been thinking about this every day for 3 weeks. She looked at his profile. She thought, he asked directly. She thought, he deserves a direct answer. "Yes," she said. He nodded once. The fire shifted. Outside the wind moved in the elm trees. "Did you know?" Catherine said. Not the larger question, not yet, not the one she had been holding since the church. The specific one, the contained one. The night before the wedding and the scissors and the 7 in the morning. No, he said, not that specifically. He paused. But I'm not going to tell you I'm surprised, and I'm not going to tell you I couldn't have predicted something like it, because I could have. I know what my mother is capable of. He stopped. I chose not to predict it. Catherine looked at him. Why, she said. He was quiet for a long moment. Because it was easier, he said. Because not predicting it meant I didn't have to do anything about it. And I have spent, he stopped, tried again. I have spent a considerable portion of my life not doing things about my mother because the things she does are never quite bad enough in any single instance to justify the difficulty of addressing them. He paused. Until they are. The last 2 words landed differently from the rest, heavier, more considered. The words of a man who has arrived at a conclusion he has been avoiding and has stopped avoiding it. I see, Catherine said. I don't expect you to find that acceptable, he said. No, she said, it isn't acceptable. He nodded again, the same single nod as before. The nod she was beginning to understand, of a man absorbing something he has decided not to deflect. I know, he said. They sat with that for a while. The fire, the clock, the wind in the elm trees, the book in his hands that neither of them was pretending he was reading anymore. Catherine thought about what Mrs. Webb had said. Emma didn't know she could ask. She thought about the first wife in Linton Cottage, 3 miles away, worn smooth and close enough to see the chimneys on a clear day. She thought about the wedding and the 7 faces and the sharp, knowing eyes of people who had understood something immediately. She thought, I am not going to do this the way Emma did it. She thought, and I cannot do it without him. Not because she needed him to rescue her, she had been very clear with herself about this, had drawn the line firmly in her mind. She did not need rescue. She was not in the business of waiting to be rescued. She was in the business of building something, and she was going to build it, and she was going to do it with or without him. But with him would be faster. And more to the point. He was her husband, and she was beginning to believe, a better man than he had yet managed to be, and the question of whether he was going to become that better man was. She was honest enough to admit this, privately, by the fire in the quiet of a Wednesday evening, not entirely without interest to her. I want to ask you something, she said. He turned to look at her. When you decided to marry me, she said, not the arrangement, I know about the arrangement. I mean you specifically deciding. Was there a moment? Did you choose it, or did you simply not object to it? He looked at her for a long moment. I chose it, he said. Why? Another pause. This one longer, the considering pause, the one she had started to recognize as the place where he was deciding whether to say the real thing or the acceptable thing. He said the real thing. Because when I met you, he said, you asked me 3 questions in the first conversation, not polite questions, questions you actually wanted answers to. And when I gave you an answer you weren't satisfied with, you said so. He paused. No one does that, not to me, not directly like that without managing it. Catherine looked at him. I thought, he said, that someone who talked to me like that might eventually. He stopped. I thought it might be good for me. He said it with the slight self-deprecation of a man who is aware that this is an incomplete reason for marriage and is not trying to pretend it's more than it is. That's not a very romantic reason, Catherine said. No, he agreed, it isn't. It's an honest one, she said. He looked at her. Is that enough? She thought about it. For now, she said, yes. The fire had burned lower when she said, your mother has been doing this for 30 years. He didn't pretend not to know what she meant. Yes, he said. To everyone. To the women in this house. Yes. He paused. My father's first wife. My father's sister when she came to stay for a season. The wives of the estate staff in smaller ways. He looked at the fire. My mother is very good at defining the space available to people. making it smaller over time, so gradually that the person doesn't realize it's happening until they find they can't move. Like stone in water, Catherine said. He looked at her sharply. She had said more than she intended. She noted this, the slight slip, the first one, the consequence of 3 weeks of vigilance beginning to ease in the presence of someone who was, she was discovering, less dangerous to be honest with than she had assumed. Someone described it to me that way, she said. He held her gaze. He did not ask who. I should have told you, he said instead. Before the wedding, I should have told you what you were coming into. Yes, she said, you should have. I didn't know how to, he paused. And I didn't want to give you a reason to refuse, he stopped, which was selfish and wrong and resulted in a woman cutting your hair with scissors on the morning of our wedding. He said it plainly without softening, the way of someone making himself look at something clearly. Catherine looked at him. She was aware of something shifting in her assessment of him, not dramatically, not a reversal, but an adjustment, a calibration. He was not the man she had expected. He was worse in some ways, more complicit, more avoidant, more capable of choosing the comfortable thing when the difficult thing was available, and better in others. He was honest when pressed. He did not manage his shame into something more presentable. He absorbed difficult truths the way she had watched him absorb them at the altar and every day since, with the compressed single nod of a man who has decided not to look away. That was something. It was not nothing. I have conditions, she said. He looked at her. I am your wife, she said. Not in the arrangement sense, I mean actually, which means this house is actually mine. The household, the staff, the decisions about how things are run, not through your mother, through me. He was quiet. I know that's not how it currently is, she said. I know it will need to change. I know that changing it will be difficult and that your mother will not receive it easily. She paused. I am not asking you to do it for me. I am asking you to not stand in my way while I do it. And if I can do more than not stand in your way, he said. She looked at him. Then do more, she said. But don't promise it unless you mean it. I would rather know exactly what I have than think I have more than is real. He nodded. The real nod this time, not the compressed, absorbing one, but something more open. The nod of a man making a decision. You have more than is real, he said. I mean that. I don't know yet exactly what I'm capable of, but I know that what I have been doing is wrong and I know that I am not going to keep doing it. He paused. That is not a promise about outcomes. It's a promise about intent. Intent is where it starts, Catherine said. Yes, he said. She looked at the fire. She thought, he is going to disappoint me at some point. He is going to choose the easy thing when the difficult thing is what's needed, because that is what he has always done and it is not a habit that breaks in a single evening. She thought, I know that. I am accounting for it. She thought, he is also sitting here at 10:30 on a Wednesday having this conversation instead of managing his way out of it, which is new and which is something. There's something I need to do tomorrow, she said. Alone. I'm going to take the small carriage and go out in the morning and I won't be back until afternoon. He looked at her. She could see the question on his face, where, why, and she watched him decide not to ask it. All right, he said. Thank you, she said. She picked up her embroidery. He picked up his book. They sat together by the fire for another hour, and it was not the silence of distance, and it was not yet the silence of comfort. But it was something in between, something with potential in it, something that was, she thought, the very earliest beginning of what she had meant when she wrote in her journal. He looks at rooms. What she had not written, what she had not let herself write, what she was beginning to believe might be true, was the thing she had seen at the altar and seen again tonight. He is learning to look at people. Slowly, imperfectly, but learning. She went to bed that night and lay in the dark and thought about Emma at Linton Cottage and the solicitor's documents and the 7 faces at the wedding and the ground she had been building on for 3 weeks. She thought, tomorrow. She thought, it starts tomorrow. She thought very quietly in the dark about the nod he had given her when she said intent is where it starts. She thought, yes, it is. He was not the man she had feared. He was not yet the man she needed. But between those 2 things, in the space of a Wednesday evening and a fire burning low and a book neither of them was reading, something had been established. Not trust, not yet, but the ground that trust requires. That was enough. For now, that was exactly enough. Linton Cottage was 3 miles from Ashworth Manor by the road and 2.5 by the path through the south gate, which Catherine took because it was faster, and because she did not want to be seen on the main road in the Ashworth carriage by anyone who might mention it to the Duchess before she was ready for that conversation. She had thought about this carefully the night before. She had thought about it the way she thought about all the things that required precision methodically, from multiple angles, with particular attention to the places where something could go wrong. She had told Edward she was going out alone, and he had not asked where. She had told the housekeeper she wanted the small carriage, and Mrs. Holt had arranged it with the efficient neutrality of a woman who had not been told she couldn't. She had left the house at 9:30, before the Duchess came down for breakfast. She had not told anyone where she was going. She did not know precisely what she was going to find. The south gate was iron, old, the kind that has been opened and closed for so many years that the motion is worn into it. It swung with the ease of something that has never stopped being used. Catherine passed through it and took the path that curved south and then west through the edge of the Ashworth parkland, past the old ice house and the stand of silver birches that were just beginning to think about spring, and emerged after 20 minutes onto the narrow lane that ran between 2 farms and eventually, after another mile, arrived at a cluster of low stone buildings that was, by any measure, a village only by the most generous interpretation of the word. Linton was 4 houses, a church smaller than Ashworth's private chapel, and a post office that was also, apparently, a bakery. The smell of bread reached her before the buildings did. The cottage was the last one, set back from the lane behind a garden wall that was lower than it had been built, the stone settling gradually into the earth the way stone does when no one has been watching it. The gate in the wall was wood, old, painted once in a color that had faded to a pleasant, indeterminate gray. Catherine stopped outside it. She thought, there is a woman on the other side of this gate who came to Ashworth Manor the way I came, who stood at that altar the way I stood, who was worn smooth and eventually left and has been 3 miles away for 11 years. She thought, she might not want to see me. She thought, I would not want to see me in her position. She pushed open the gate and went in. The woman who answered the door was not what Catherine had expected. She had constructed, without meaning to, a picture of Emma from Mrs. Webb's account, the worn smooth, the gradual erosion, the quiet exit into a small house and a smaller life. She had imagined someone diminished, someone carrying the particular quality of people who have been reduced. Emma was 51 years old and she looked alive. Not dramatically, not the alive of someone who had rebuilt themselves spectacularly. The quieter, more durable alive of someone who had found, in the absence of the thing that had been damaging them, the space to simply be themselves again. Her face had lines in it that were not unhappy. Her hair was gray at the temples and she hadn't troubled to disguise it. She was wearing a gardening apron over her dress, which meant Catherine had caught her mid-task, which meant she had come to the door regardless. She looked at Catherine. She said, "You're the new Duchess." "Yes," Catherine said. Emma looked at her for a moment. Then she stepped back and opened the door wider. "Come in," she said. The cottage was small and absolutely itself. Not Ashworth Manor, nothing like Ashworth Manor, not in scale or arrangement or the particular quality of a house that has been managed rather than lived in. This was a house that had been lived in, thoroughly and without apology, by a person who had made her own decisions about what mattered. Books everywhere, not arranged, not displayed, simply present, on shelves and tables and the windowsill, and one pile on the floor beside a chair that was clearly the chair Emma used. A desk in the corner with something half-written on it. 2 cats, one asleep on the hearthrug and one watching Catherine from the top of the bookshelf, with the judicial expression of a cat that has not yet decided whether a visitor is welcome. Emma made tea without asking whether Catherine wanted it. They sat at the kitchen table. There was a brief silence of the kind that occurs between people who have come to say something and are deciding where to begin. Emma began. "She's still there," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," Catherine said. "Still running the house?" "Yes." Emma looked at her tea. "How long have you been married?" 3 weeks, a pause, "and you found your way here already." She looked up. "You're faster than I was." "I had help," Catherine said. "Mrs. Webb." Something moved across Emma's face, brief, warm, the expression of someone hearing a name they associate with genuine kindness. "She's still there too," she said. "Not a question either." "Yes," Catherine said. "She's been there since before Edward was born." "She was kind to me," Emma said, "in the ways she could be, which weren't very many given the circumstances." She paused. She couldn't say anything directly, but she would find ways to let me know I wasn't imagining things. When you've been told often enough and cleverly enough that you're imagining things, someone letting you know you're not is considerable. Catherine thought about Mrs. Webb in the small sitting room. "I've been waiting 11 years for someone to come to that church with their head up. The patience of it. 11 years of waiting for the next one, watching the door, finding the ways she could." "She told me about you," Catherine said, "about what happened. She told me there were legal documents that the management of the household passes by right to the Duke's wife." Emma looked at her. "She told you that?" "Yes." "She didn't tell me that," Emma said quietly. "She didn't know it then, or she didn't think I was ready to hear it, or—" She stopped, set her cup down. "It wouldn't have helped me," she said. "Even if I'd known, I didn't know how to use it. I didn't know how to fight. I'd never had to fight for anything before, and by the time I understood that I needed to, I was already—" She looked at her hands. "Tired. I was very tired." Catherine looked at her. She thought about 3 miles. 11 years. The chimneys of Ashworth Manor visible on a clear day. She thought about the word tired, not the tiredness of an evening or a week, but the deeper kind. The tiredness that comes from being managed and minimized and worn at until you have nothing left to resist with. She thought, this is what the scissors were. Not a single cruelty. The beginning of a process. You arrive at the wedding already diminished, already uncertain, already having been shown, before the marriage has even technically begun, that this house has a woman in it who will take things from you that you thought were yours and call it tradition and smile while she does it. You arrive already tired. That was the plan. "She cut my hair," Catherine said, "the morning of the wedding." Emma looked up. "She said it was tradition." A long pause. "She told me," Emma said slowly, "that my dress was wrong the night before, that the color was unlucky in this family and she had something else I could wear." She paused. "It was gray, plain gray, like a servant's Sunday dress. She had it laid out and waiting, and she was so certain, so warm, so genuinely kind-seeming about it that She stopped. "I wore it. I wore gray to my own wedding because she told me to, and I didn't yet know how to say no to her." The kitchen was very quiet. One of the cats jumped down from the bookshelf and walked to the door and sat looking at it, as cats do, as though outside had become suddenly interesting, and it was waiting for someone to notice. "She finds the thing," Emma said, "the one thing you have, and she takes it, not to be cruel or not only to be cruel, to show you at the beginning what the shape of things is, that she is the one who decides what you have and what you don't." She looked at Catherine. "For me it was the dress, for you it was your hair." "Yes," Catherine said. And what did you do? Catherine looked at her. I went to the church anyway with my head up. Emma held her gaze for a long moment, then she said, Good. They talked for 2 hours. Emma talked about the 3 years at Ashworth Manor the way you talk about something that happened in another life. Not without feeling, but with the distance of someone who has had enough time to see the shape of it rather than just the inside. She was precise and unsentimental in a way that Catherine recognized as the product of long private thinking, the kind you do in a quiet cottage with cats and books and the distance of 11 years. She talked about the tactics, the small exclusions, the way the staff had been consistently, gently redirected away from her, the way social invitations had been managed so that Emma was present but peripheral, visible but without weight, the way Edward, who had been, Emma said carefully, neither complicit nor protective, simply absent in the way of a man who has learned not to see what is difficult to see, had been unavailable in the specific moments when being available would have mattered. He's not a cruel man, Emma said. I want to be accurate about that. He's not his mother. He's a man who learned very early that the easiest way to live in that house was to not look too closely at certain things. And that became, she searched for the word, a habit, a very deep habit. I know, Catherine said. We talked about it. Emma looked at her. He admitted it. Yes. A pause. He didn't admit it to me, not once in 3 years. She was quiet for a moment. But then I didn't ask him directly. I thought if I asked directly it would become real. I kept hoping it would resolve itself. She looked at her hands. Things like that don't resolve themselves. No, Catherine said, they don't. You're going to fight her, Emma said. It was not quite a question. Yes, Catherine said. How? Catherine thought about the ground she had been building for 3 weeks. The names she had learned, and the system she had mapped, and the 7 faces at the wedding and Mrs. Webb in the small sitting room, and the solicitor's documents, and the East Garden wall that kept coming up in the Duchess's conversation. Slowly, she said, on her own terms. Emma looked at her for a long moment. The documents, she said. You're going to use the legal basis. Eventually, Catherine said, but not first, not as an opening move. If I come in with legal authority, the first thing she'll do is make me look like someone who came to her son's house with a weapon. The sympathy goes to her. She paused. I need the sympathy to go to me, which means I need people to see clearly what she is before I make any move that can be framed as aggressive. Emma was very still. That's right, she said. That's exactly right. She paused. I never thought of it that way. I was always reacting. She'd do something and I'd respond or fail to respond, and either way she controlled the terms. She looked at Catherine with an expression that was, Catherine thought, somewhere between admiration and something sadder, the specific sadness of a person who can see from the outside what they couldn't see from the inside. You're not reacting, you're building. Trying to, Catherine said. You're doing it, Emma said. Coming here is part of it. Yes, Catherine said. I needed to understand what I was dealing with, the full shape of it, not just my 3 weeks of it. And now you do. Yes, Catherine paused. I also came because she stopped. Emma waited. I came because I wanted you to know, Catherine said, that someone is there now, that I know what happened to you and I know whose fault it was, and I'm not going to pretend it was nobody's fault because it's more comfortable that way. She paused. And because I thought there might be things you know that I don't, about the house, about her, things that would help you, Emma said. Help both of us, Catherine said. Emma looked at her. She looked at her for a long time with the full, unhurried attention of a woman who has had a great deal of time to learn how to see clearly and is using that skill now. Then she got up. She went to the desk in the corner. She came back with a small notebook, old, the cover worn, the pages dense with handwriting. She set it on the table between them. I kept notes, she said, from the 3 years, every incident, every tactic, every person who helped and every person who didn't and why. She paused. I kept them because I thought someday they might be useful to someone. I've been keeping them in that desk for 11 years waiting to find out who." Catherine looked at the notebook. She thought about 11 years. She thought about a woman who had been worn smooth and had come to a cottage 3 miles away and had kept notes, just in case, for someone she didn't know yet. She looked up at Emma. "Thank you," she said. Emma pushed the notebook across the table. "Use it well," she said. Catherine left Linton Cottage at 12:30 with the notebook in her bag, and 3 things she had not had when she arrived. The first was the full shape of what she was dealing with, not just the 3 weeks of her own experience but 11 years of Emma's before it, precise and documented and organized by a woman who had, in the quiet of her cottage and the long years since, become an extraordinary observer of the things she had survived. The second was a name, a woman at the neighboring estate, Lady Forsyth, whose sharp knowing eyes Catherine had noted at the wedding, who had, according to Emma's notes, been watching the Duchess for 20 years with the patient attention of someone who has been waiting for an opportunity and has not yet found one she was confident enough to use. The third was harder to name than the other 2. She walked back through the south gate and along the path through the parkland, and she thought about Emma at the kitchen table with her cats and her books and her gardening apron and her 11 years of notes. She thought about the dress, gray, like a servant's Sunday dress, and the wedding Catherine hadn't seen but could picture completely. She thought, she is all right. Not all right in the sense of unharmed. She was harmed. The harm was visible in the particular way she talked about the 3 years, the precision of it, the distance she had needed to develop to be able to speak about it at all. But all right in the sense of herself. In the sense of a woman who had come out the other side of something and had kept her notes and her cats and her sharp, clear mind, and her ability to look at a stranger who arrived at her door and say come in without hesitation. The Duchess had not succeeded. She had driven Emma out, but she had not diminished her. Emma had taken herself somewhere small and quiet and had simply continued being Emma, which was, Catherine now understood, a considerably more formidable thing than the Duchess had apparently anticipated. She never left the county, Mrs. Webb had said. No, Catherine thought. She didn't. She thought about that all the way back to the house. She returned to find Edward in the entrance hall. Not waiting for her, he was crossing from one side to the other, something in his hand, the purposeful movement of a man in the middle of an ordinary day. But he stopped when she came through the door, and he looked at her, and she saw him assess the small bag she was carrying, the slight additional weight of a notebook, and choose not to ask. "Good morning," he said. "Yes," she said. "Useful," he nodded. Then he said, "My mother asked where you'd gone." Catherine looked at him. "I told her I didn't know," he said. A pause, the weight of it, the implications of it. "Thank you," she said. "I'm not going to make a habit of lying to her," he said. "I want to be clear about that. I don't think deception is the right." "I'm not asking you to lie to her," Catherine said. "I'm asking you to let me manage my own movements without a full accounting, which is different." He thought about this. "Yes," he said, "it is." "And this morning," she said, "you didn't know where I'd gone, you told her the truth." He looked at her. Something moved across his face, the recognizing expression, the one she was beginning to know. "Yes," he said, "I did." She moved toward the stairs. "Catherine," he said. She stopped. "The east garden wall," he said. "My mother mentioned it this morning. She said she wanted to discuss restoring it, taking on a mason, the cost of the work, whether to expand the kitchen garden while the wall is being." He stopped. He was looking at her with the particular expression of a man who has just, in the middle of a sentence, understood something he did not understand when he began it. "She's going to propose a project," Catherine said, "something that requires spending, something that establishes her authority over the house accounts." He stared at her. "She's been mentioning the wall for 2 weeks," Catherine said, "building to it." He was very still. "I've been watching her do it," Catherine said, "letting her build to it, because I wanted to know what the project was going to be before she proposed it, so that when she does I know exactly what I'm dealing with." He looked at her for a long time. "You've been," he stopped. "For 3 weeks you've been." "Learning the ground," she said. "Yes." She went upstairs. Behind her she heard him stand very still for a moment in the entrance hall. Then she heard him laugh. Not loudly, not with any particular theater, just a short, quiet, genuine sound, the laugh of a man who has realized something that has genuinely surprised him and is not trying to suppress the surprise. She allowed herself at the top of the stairs where he couldn't see her, a small smile, filed. She had the notebook. She had Emma's 11 years. She had Lady Forsyth's sharp eyes and the solicitor's documents and the East Garden wall and a husband who had told his mother the truth, and then stood in the entrance hall and laughed. The ground was ready. The building could begin. The East Garden wall came up on a Thursday. Not at dinner, the Duchess was too skilled for that, too practiced in the art of timing. She brought it up in the morning room at 11 o'clock, when Catherine and she were alone together over correspondence, and the light was good and the fire was warm and everything felt, as it generally did in the Duchess's company, pleasant and easy and entirely without edge. She said, "I've been thinking about the east wall." Catherine set down her pen. "Oh," she said. "It needs repointing rather urgently, I think. And while the mason is there, it seems sensible to think about extending the kitchen garden wall further south. Edward has been meaning to do it for years." She smiled. "I thought I might write to Mr. Carver, the estate mason, this week and ask him to come and give his assessment, if you're agreeable." The last 3 words were the thing, "if you're agreeable." Not, "I'll need to discuss it with the estate accounts." Not, "Shall we speak to Edward about the cost?" Not, "Perhaps you'd like to lead this as the house is yours to manage, if you're agreeable." The framing of someone asking permission from a guest, from someone whose role in the household is undefined and deferential and has no particular authority over anything. Catherine looked at her. She thought about 3 weeks of watching this. She thought about Emma's notebook, which she had read in its entirety over 2 evenings, annotating it in the margins with her own observations about which patterns she had already seen and which she hadn't encountered yet. She thought about the Thursday lunch she had been learning to attend. She thought about Lady Forsyth's sharp eyes. She thought, not yet. Not this one. This one was not the moment. The moment required an audience. "Of course," she said warmly. "That sounds very sensible. Shall I write to Mr. Carver, or would you prefer to?" The Duchess smiled. "I'll do it," she said. "I know his schedule." "How useful," Catherine said. She picked up her pen and went back to her correspondence. The moment came 3 weeks later. It came, as Catherine had arranged it to come, not by chance, not by fortune, but by the specific and patient work of someone who had been building toward a particular configuration of people in a particular room for the better part of a month. It came at the Ashworth Thursday lunch. The Thursday lunch was the Duchess's primary social instrument. Catherine had understood this early. It was the thing Emma's notebook made most clear, the event around which the Duchess's social authority was most visibly organized. 12 to 16 people, the same core group with variations, the neighboring families and the county connections, and the people whose good opinion mattered, and whose good opinion the Duchess had been cultivating for 30 years. Every Thursday, without fail, from October through April. The Duchess ran it with the smooth authority of someone who has hosted the same event for so long that the event has become inseparable from the host. The guests expected certain things, certain arrangements, certain conversations, and the Duchess provided them with the consistency of someone who understands that reliability is itself a form of power. Catherine had been attending since her first week. She had been attending the way she attended everything, quietly, apparently without agenda, learning the room. She knew, by the 5th Thursday, which guests had influence and which had the appearance of influence and which had neither but were there, because, Removing them would cause more trouble than keeping them. She knew who talked to whom, and who avoided whom, and the specific social geometries that had calcified over 30 years of the same people in the same room. She knew that Lady Forsyth, the sharp-eyed woman from the wedding, Emma's neighbor, 20 years of watching the Duchess with patient attention, sat always at the far end of the table on the left, which was the seat with the best sightline to everything and the least direct exposure to the Duchess's attention. She knew that Mrs. Alderton, 60 years old, the most senior woman in the room after the Duchess herself, whose family had been in the county longer than the Ashworths, was treated by the Duchess with the particular warmth reserved for people whose support is important and whose potential defection is therefore a thing to be managed. She knew that the Reverend Howell's wife, who attended with her husband every second Thursday, had said something at Catherine's wedding, quietly, to her neighbor, but Catherine had been in earshot that sounded very much like, "What has that woman done now?" And she knew that Mr. Carver the mason had submitted his assessment of the East Wall project, which the Duchess had shared with Edward, not with Catherine, and which involved a figure that was, by any reasonable accounting, 3 times what the work required. She knew this because she had spoken to Mr. Carver herself. Not confrontationally. She had met him at the wall one morning when he came to take measurements, and she had asked practical questions in the tone of someone with genuine interest in the project, and he had answered them with the helpful directness of a man who respects someone who knows what they're asking about. And in the course of the conversation she had asked, with casual interest, what similar work had cost elsewhere in the county. Mr. Carver had told her. And Catherine had done the arithmetic. She did not confront the Duchess about the figure. She said nothing to Edward about it, though she suspected, from something in his face when he mentioned the assessment, that he had done his own arithmetic and arrived at a similar place. She said nothing to anyone. She wrote a letter instead. She wrote it to the solicitor, the one Mrs. Webb had named, the one who held the late Duke's documents. She introduced herself, explained that she was the current Duchess and that she wished to review the household management documents at his earliest convenience, and asked for an appointment. The solicitor wrote back within the week. He was, his letter indicated, delighted to hear from her. He had been, he said, hoping to establish contact for some time. The documents were entirely in order. He was available Thursday of the following week if that suited. Catherine wrote back. Thursday suited very well, but before Thursday came the Thursday lunch. The specific Thursday lunch for which Catherine had been, with the patience and precision of someone who has been planning a single move on a very long board, arranging the pieces. Lady Forsyth was there. Mrs. Alderton was there. The Reverend Howell's wife was there. It was her Thursday. Edward was there, which was not unusual, though he sat at the table with the slightly different quality of attention Catherine had noticed in him over the past weeks, more present, less deliberately withdrawn, the posture of a man who has started watching something he used to look away from. 14 people. The right 14. The Duchess made her move over the second course. She made it as she always made things, beautifully, smoothly, warmly, with the ease of someone who has been doing this for 30 years and has never once been interrupted. She was talking about the East Wall project. She had been talking about it in the ambient way she talked about household matters since the soup. Now over the fish, she said. I've had Mr. Carver's assessment. We're moving forward with the work in the spring. I thought we might expand the kitchen garden at the same time, since the wall will already be open. It's a larger project than I initially envisioned, but I think the result will be. How much larger? Catherine said. The table went quiet. Not dramatically, not the silence of a scene, the quieter silence of people who have registered a change in tone and are adjusting their attention accordingly. The conversations nearby shifted almost imperceptibly. Heads did not turn, but the orientation of the room did. The Duchess looked at Catherine. The smile, Warm, practiced, entirely present. The full assessment is quite detailed, she said. I can share it with you. I've seen it, Catherine said. I spoke with Mr. Carver when he came to measure. She paused, and in the pause she kept her voice easy, conversational, the tone of someone raising a practical question rather than an accusation. The figure he's quoted for the repointing is considerably higher than what similar work costs elsewhere in the county. I was curious about that. The table was definitely quiet now. Not the ambient quiet of a momentary pause. The specific quiet of a room that has understood what it is watching and has decided to watch carefully. The Duchess's smile did not change. Mr. Carver is the best mason in the county, she said. His rates reflect that. Of course, Catherine said. I'm sure they do. I thought we might get 2 or 3 other assessments just to be thorough. It seems sensible for a project of this size. She looked at the Duchess with the full, warm, pleasant attention of a woman who is being entirely reasonable. I've already written to 2 other masons. I expect to hear back by the end of next week. A pause, a very specific pause. The kind of pause that occurs when someone has made a move that cannot be taken back, and the room is waiting to see what happens next. The Duchess looked at Catherine. And Catherine saw it very briefly, behind the warmth and the smile and the 30 years of absolute social control, the recalibration, the fractional adjustment, the micro-movement of a woman reassessing the thing she is dealing with. It lasted less than a second. Then the Duchess laughed. Warm, genuine sounding, the laugh of a woman who finds something charming. How thorough, she said. What a sensible idea. I should have thought of it myself. She turned to Mrs. Alderton and said something about the spring planting. The table exhaled. The conversation resumed. Catherine picked up her fork. She did not look at Edward. She did not look at Lady Forsyth. She did not look at anyone in particular. But she was aware, in the way she was aware of everything, peripherally and precisely, of what was happening in the room around her. She was aware that Mrs. Alderton, in the act of turning to respond to the Duchess, had paused for just a fraction of a second longer than was necessary. The pause of someone filing something. She was aware that the Reverend Howell's wife had touched her husband's arm, very briefly, the specific touch of a person communicating something without words. She was aware that Lady Forsyth at the far end of the table had not moved at all. But when Catherine looked up just once, just briefly, Lady Forsyth was looking at her. Not the sharp, assessing look of someone watching a situation. Something else. Something that was almost the beginning of a smile. Catherine looked back at her plate. She thought 7 faces at the wedding. She thought, the count is higher now. After the lunch, after the goodbyes and the carriages and the last guests departing into the thin spring afternoon, Edward found her in the entrance hall. The Duchess had gone upstairs. They were alone. He stood in front of her, and he looked at her with the full weight attention he had been learning to give things, and he said, "That was the most carefully prepared, spontaneous question I have ever witnessed." Catherine looked at him. "Was it visible?" she said. "To me," he said, "because I've been watching you for 6 weeks and I know what you look like when you're doing something you've been planning." He paused. "Not to anyone else, I think." "Good," she said. "My mother will know." "Yes," Catherine said. "She'll know, but she can't say so. Saying so means admitting that a question about Mason's rates in front of 14 people was something she needed to defend against." She paused. "She won't say so." He looked at her. "You're not afraid of her," he said. It was not quite a question. "I am a little," she said. "She's formidable and she's been doing this for 30 years and I've been doing it for 6 weeks. I would be foolish not to be a little afraid." She paused. But afraid and stopped are different things. He was very still for a moment. Then he said, "What do you need from me?" She looked at him, this man who had spent his life looking at rooms and was learning, slowly and imperfectly, to look at people, who had stood in an entrance hall and laughed at the right moment, who had told his mother the truth about not knowing where Catherine had gone and then told Catherine he had done it, who was standing in the entrance hall now asking what she needed, not what he could offer, what she needed. She thought about Emma's notebook. She thought about the solicitor's appointment on Thursday. She thought about the east wall and Mr. Carver's figure and the 14 people at the table and the specific fraction of a second in Mrs. Alderton's pause. She thought about what came next. "The solicitor appointment," she said. "Thursday, I need you to come with me." He nodded immediately. "Yes," he said, "all right." "Not to speak for me," she said. "To be there. To make it clear that you know I'm going and that you're not standing between me and the documents." He held her gaze. "I understand the difference," he said. "Good," she said. She started toward the stairs. "Catherine," he said. She stopped. He was looking at her with the expression she was still learning. The one that was not the social expression, not the managed one. The undefended version that arrived in entrance halls and beside low fires on Wednesday evenings. "She's going to come back harder," he said. "After today, she's going to reassess and come back with something more considered." He paused. "She always does." "I know," Catherine said. "And he stopped, tried again. "I should have told you that earlier, before you married me. I should have told you what you were coming into, and I didn't, and that was wrong, and I know that." He paused. "I'm not going to keep not doing things about it. I want you to know that." She looked at him. She thought, "He will disappoint me at some point." She thought, "He is standing in an entrance hall telling me he's not going to keep not doing things about it," which is an unusual formulation but is, I think, the most honest he knows how to be right now. She thought, "That is, for today, sufficient." "I know," she said. She went upstairs. Behind her she heard him stand in the entrance hall for a moment. Then she heard him go to the study. She heard, a minute later, the sound of the study door opening again. She heard him walk toward the corridor that led to the estate manager's office. She did not know what he said when he got there. But she heard the conversation low, inaudible from the stairs but present, definite, the specific tone of a man who has decided to do something and is beginning to do it. She stood on the stairs for a moment. She filed it. Thursday came gray and cool and entirely businesslike. The solicitor's office was in the county town, 12 miles from Ashworth Manor. The carriage ride took an hour. Edward sat across from Catherine and they did not talk very much, which was fine. It was not the silence of distance. It was the silence of two people with somewhere to go. Mr. Pemberton was 60, precise, and had clearly been waiting for this meeting with the contained eagerness of a professional man who has had information sitting in his files for 12 years that belonged to someone who didn't know it existed. He showed Catherine the documents. She read them carefully. He talked her through the relevant sections, the management clauses, the household authority, the specific language that established, in plain legal terms, that the running of Ashworth Manor and all decisions pertaining to the household fell to the Duke's wife, not to any other member of the family, regardless of prior arrangement or custom. He said, "These have been in place since the late Duke's estate was settled. They were written specifically to, well." He paused, with the delicacy of a solicitor who has opinions about a situation and expresses them through precision rather than editorializing, "to ensure clarity about household authority." Catherine looked at the documents. She thought, the late Duke knew. She thought, he knew what his wife was, what she had done to Emma, what she would do to whoever came next. And he wrote this into his estate settlement. She thought about a man who had large appetites and variable judgment, who had nonetheless genuinely loved the estate and the people on it, who had, at the end, tried to leave something useful behind. He wrote it in, she thought, and no one told her. "No one told me this existed," she said. "No," Mr. Pemberton said. He was looking at his desk. "Who knew?" A pause. "Myself. the late Duke's personal secretary who is no longer with us, and he paused again with the careful timing of someone choosing his words. I believe the late Duchess may have been informed, yes. The room was very quiet. Edward, sitting slightly behind Catherine, made a sound that was not quite a word. She knew the documents existed, Catherine said. I believe so, Mr. Pemberton said. And she told no one. As far as I'm aware, Catherine set the documents down on his desk. She looked at them for a moment, these papers that had been sitting in this office for 12 years waiting, while Emma wore gray to her wedding, while Emma spent 3 years being worn smooth, while Emma walked to Linton Cottage and kept notes for 11 years on the chance that someone might need them. She thought, I am going to use these. She thought, but not yet, not as the first move. She thought, I have the ground. Now I build the walls. She looked at Mr. Pemberton. I would like copies, she said, certified copies, and I would like your confirmation in writing that these are the operative documents governing household management at Ashworth Manor. Mr. Pemberton was already reaching for his pen. Of course, Your Grace, he said. In the carriage on the way home, Edward was quiet for a long time. Then he said, she knew. Yes, Catherine said. She knew for 12 years that the documents existed, and she told no one. Yes. He looked out the window. The gray countryside going past, the farms, the stone walls, the elm trees that were beginning very tentatively to consider spring. My father wrote them specifically because of what she did to Emma, he said. Not a question. He was working it out as he said it. I think so, Catherine said. And she kept them in an office 12 miles away and told no one and kept running the house as though they didn't exist. He stopped. For 12 years. And before that, for however long she ran the house before Emma, Catherine paused, probably closer to 30. He was very still. She watched his face, the working of it, the specific quality of a man who has been choosing not to see something, and is now seeing it, fully, in the light of an overcast April afternoon in a carriage 12 miles from home. I need to tell you something, he said. She waited. I have told myself for a very long time that my mother was difficult but not malicious, that the things she did were controlling, yes, excessive, yes, but not deliberate in the way of someone who intends harm, that she simply didn't know how to. He stopped. I have been wrong about that. Catherine looked at him. She knew Emma had a legal right to manage that house, he said. She knew it and she hid it and she drove her out anyway. That's not difficulty, that's... No, Catherine said, it isn't. He looked at her. I'm sorry, he said. I know that's insufficient. I know it doesn't. I know an apology doesn't repair what I failed to do. But I'm saying it because it's true and because I think you should hear it clearly and not as a managed version of it. Catherine looked at him. The carriage moved. The elm trees went past. She thought about the first conversation. I chose it because you asked 3 questions and said so when the answers weren't good enough. She thought about the Wednesday evening by the fire and the entrance hall and the conversation with the estate manager she had heard from the stairs. She thought about this man in a carriage on a gray April afternoon, saying, I have been wrong in the unmanaged way of someone who has decided to stop managing. I know, she said. Is it enough? He said. She thought about it. Ask me again in a year, she said. He nodded. They wrote the rest of the way in silence that was not distance. She came back to Ashworth Manor on a Thursday afternoon with certified copies of the household management documents in her bag and the notebook from Linton Cottage and 12 years of evidence and 30 years of documented pattern, and the knowledge that the ground was ready and the walls were built, and what remained was the roof. The Duchess was in the drawing room. She looked up when Catherine came in, the warm smile, the practiced warmth, the 30 years of it. How was your outing? She said. Very useful, Catherine said. She sat down. She accepted the tea that was offered. She was warm and pleasant and entirely at ease, and she gave the Duchess nothing, no anxiety, no aggression, no crack in the surface that could be used. The Duchess watched her. For just a moment, the briefest possible moment, Catherine saw it again. The recalibration. The fractional adjustment of a woman who is very good at reading people and is finding, in the face across from her, something she has not encountered before. Then the warmth closed over it, and the Duchess talked about the spring planting, and Catherine listened and responded and was impeccable. She was, she thought, going to be impeccable for as long as it took, and then she was going to stop being impeccable. And that was going to be the thing the Duchess remembered. The moment came on a Tuesday 3 weeks later. Not a Thursday, not the lunch, not the 14 people, not the event the Duchess had been running for 30 years. A smaller occasion, a morning call from Mrs. Alderton, who had taken to calling on Catherine with the increasing frequency of a woman who is conducting a gradual and careful investigation into a situation and is finding what she finds. The Duchess was there. Of course she was there. She was always there. That was the structure of the house. The Duchess in every room, warm and present and managing everything. Mrs. Alderton was talking about a family in the next county, a niece, a marriage, a situation that had, by the sound of it, some resemblance to the situation in this house, though Mrs. Alderton was too skilled to draw the comparison directly. The Duchess said at the appropriate moment, with the warmth of a woman offering wisdom she has earned, "These things take time. A new wife in an established household needs to find her place gradually. It's natural for the family to guide the process." The room was not quite silent, but it was close. Catherine set down her cup. She looked at the Duchess. She said, very pleasantly, very directly, with the full, warm, uncomplicated attention of a woman who has been waiting for the exact right moment for 6 weeks. "I think a wife in her own household doesn't need to find her place gradually. I think her place is already established. It's in the documents." The room stopped. Not the polite semi-silence of the Thursday lunch. The complete, clear, bell-jar silence of 3 people in a morning room where something has just become irreversible. Mrs. Alderton was very still. The Duchess looked at Catherine. Catherine looked back, warm, pleasant, entirely at ease, the surface of a woman who has said a factual thing and finds it unremarkable. "The household management documents," Catherine said, "from the late Duke's estate settlement. I visited Mr. Pemberton last Thursday and reviewed them. They're very clear." She paused, just a fraction, just enough. "I thought you'd know the ones I mean." The silence was extraordinary. It was the silence of a checkmate announced in a quiet voice in the middle of an ordinary morning. The Duchess held Catherine's gaze. She held it for 4 seconds, Catherine counted, in the way she counted everything. And then, for the first time, Catherine saw what was beneath the warmth. Not malice. She had expected malice, and it was not quite that. It was something older and more defended. The expression of a woman who has been the most important person in this house for 30 years and has understood in 4 seconds that this is the morning it stopped. It lasted 4 seconds. Then the warmth came back, practiced, complete, exactly as it had always been. "Of course," the Duchess said, her voice was steady. "I know the ones you mean." A pause. "Good," Catherine said. She picked up her cup. She drank her tea. She turned to Mrs. Alderton with the warm, easy attention of a woman continuing a pleasant morning call, and she said, "You were telling us about your niece." Mrs. Alderton looked at her. And then Mrs. Alderton, 60 years old, the most senior woman in the county after the Duchess herself, whose family had been here longer than the Ashworths, smiled. Not the careful smile, not the correct one, the real one. "Yes," she said, "I was. The documents were cited. The moment was irreversible. The Duchess had heard her own history named in her own drawing room. Catherine had done it warmly, pleasantly, without a raised voice. And the most senior woman in the county had smiled. The roof was on. What remained now was simply, living in the house. Spring came to Ashworth Manor on a Thursday. Not the tentative, provisional spring of the previous year, the apologetic kind that had arrived during Catherine's first weeks in the house and had felt, in retrospect, entirely appropriate to those weeks. This was the decided kind. The elm trees along the drive came out overnight. The kitchen garden wall, repointed by a mason from the next county at 1/3 of Mr. Carver's original figure, stood clean and pale in the April light. Against it, the roses Catherine had planted in October were beginning, cautiously, to consider blooming. She was in the garden when Edward found her. Not the formal garden, the kitchen garden, which was hers in the specific way that the morning room was hers, and the correspondence room was hers, and the household accounts were hers. Not because anyone had made a ceremony of handing them over, but because she had simply, over the course of 12 months, become the person who dealt with them. The handing over had not been an event. It had been a process, slow, unremarked, the particular way authority shifts when one person builds something real and another person's foundation turns out to have been custom all along. Custom, Catherine had learned, does not hold forever, but it holds for a very long time. Edward came through the gate with his coat on and his hat in his hands. She had noticed, over the course of a year, that he carried his hat when he was looking for her and wore it when he was going somewhere specific. She had not told him she had noticed this. She had simply filed it in the drawer where she kept the things about him that were hers. "There's a letter," he said. She straightened up. She was in the far corner of the kitchen garden, examining the progress of the sweet peas along the south wall, her gloves muddy and her dress. The old one, the practical one, in the state it was usually in by 10 o'clock in the morning when the weather was suitable for actual work. He held it out. The handwriting on the front was unfamiliar, not the solicitor's precise hand, not Mrs. Webb's careful script, not any of the regular correspondence. A woman's hand, she thought, clear, unhurried. She took off one glove and opened it. It was from Emma. It was not a long letter. Emma did not write long letters. This was the fourth Catherine had received from her since the visit to Linton Cottage, and she had understood quickly that Emma's letters were precise, like everything else about her. She said what she meant and did not add to it. This one said, "I have heard through the specific and reliable channel of Mrs. Webb, who continues to be the most efficient distributor of accurate information in the county, that the Thursday lunches are now rather different from how they used to be, and that the household accounts are in order, and that Mr. Carver has not been to Ashworth Manor since last autumn. I thought you would want to know that I have begun a small garden here, nothing ambitious. Sweet peas along the south wall, which Mrs. Webb tells me you have done as well, though I did not know that when I started. Perhaps there is something about south walls. I am well. I think you are well. I am glad you came to Linton Cottage." Catherine read it twice. Then she folded it carefully and put it in the pocket of her practical dress beside her remaining glove. She looked at the sweet peas along the south wall. She thought about Emma at Linton Cottage with her own sweet peas and her cats and her garden and her precise, unhurried handwriting. She thought about a woman who had been worn smooth and had come out the other side of it still herself, still sharp, still watchful, still capable of writing 4 sentences that said everything they needed to say and nothing they didn't. She thought, I am going to visit her. She thought, not for information, not for the notebook, just to visit. She thought this week. "Good news," Edward said. He had been watching her read, she knew this. She always knew when he was watching, which was most of the time, which was something she had stopped finding remarkable and started finding simply true, part of the landscape of the year. "Yes," she said. She handed him the letter. He read it. She watched his face, the slight movement of his eyes across Emma's precise lines. The pause at Mr. Carver has not been to Ashworth Manor, the thing that happened to his expression when he read "I am glad you came." He folded it. He handed it back. He was quiet for a moment. in the way he was quiet when he was between the thing he was thinking and the thing he was going to say. "I want to apologize to her," he said. "Emma, I've been thinking about it for some months." He paused. "I don't know if she'd want that." "Ask her," Catherine said. "She might not want to see me." "She might not," Catherine agreed. "But ask, don't decide for her." He looked at her. "Yes," he said, "all right." She pulled her glove back on and returned to the sweet peas. He stayed. This was a thing he did now, stayed in the room, or the garden, or wherever she was, not necessarily talking, not necessarily doing anything in particular, simply present in the way she had asked him to be present, and that he had learned, over a year of practicing it, to actually be. It had not come naturally. She had watched it not come naturally, had watched him in the early months sometimes turn to leave a room and then stop himself and turn back, the visible effort of someone overriding a habit so deep it had become instinct. By now it was mostly not an effort. By now it was mostly, simply what he did. She found she had stopped cataloging it as evidence. It was simply true now. He was there. The Duchess was in the East Wing. This was the thing that had not been announced, not been discussed, not been the subject of any formal negotiation. It had happened like the household authority had happened, by the slow and unremarked process of reality asserting itself. The Duchess was in the East Wing because the East Wing was where she lived now, her suite of rooms, her sitting room, her schedule which intersected with the household schedule at meals and at certain social occasions and otherwise ran parallel to it. She came to dinner. She came to the Thursday lunches, which were still Thursday lunches. The same families, largely the same arrangements, the same core of the county that had been coming to this table for 30 years. The Duchess sat at her end of the table and was warm and skilled, and exactly as she had always been. And Catherine sat at her end of the table and was warm and competent and exactly as she had become. And the room had adjusted to the new configuration the way rooms always adjust to the distribution of actual authority, not quickly, not without some realignment, but completely. Mrs. Alderton came every Thursday. Lady Forsyth had come twice since the morning of the documents, which was more than she had come in the previous year. She sat always at the far end of the table with her sharp eyes, and she and Catherine had developed, without discussing it, the specific understanding of two women who have seen the same thing from different angles and found each other's perspective clarifying. They did not speak often. But when they did it was direct and without performance, and that, Catherine had found, was worth considerably more than frequency. Mrs. Webb came to see Catherine on a Tuesday morning. She came in the way she always came now, not appearing in a small sitting room by chance but walking through the house with the ease of someone who knows their place in it is secure and has no need to be tentative about it. She had that ease, Catherine thought, because it was true. Mrs. Webb's position in the household was not in question. It had not been in question since the morning Catherine had found her in the small sitting room and sat down across from her and said, "May I?" She sat now in the chair across the writing desk, and she set her hands in her lap, and she looked at Catherine with the steady attention she had always given her. "I wanted to tell you something," she said. "Tell me," Catherine said. "The Duchess came to find me yesterday evening," Mrs. Webb said. "She asked me," she paused. "She asked me how long I had known about the documents." Catherine set down her pen. "What did you say?" she said. "I told her I had known since the estate was settled," Mrs. Webb said. 12 years. A silence. "How did she receive that?" Catherine said. Mrs. Webb looked at her hands for a moment. "Quietly," she said. "She was very quiet. She didn't say anything angry. She paused. "She asked me why I hadn't told her I knew. And I told her that it wasn't my information to share," Mrs. Webb said. "That it belonged to whoever was in your position. That I had been waiting for whoever was in your position to arrive." She paused. "She asked if I had told you. And I told her yes. Another silence. She didn't say anything else, Mrs. Webb said. She just nodded once and left. Catherine looked at the window. She thought about the Duchess nodding once in a corridor and leaving, the compressed, absorbing nod, the one that meant understanding received, no argument made. She had seen that nod before, on a different face, in a different context. He learned it from somewhere, she thought. The thought arrived without warmth and without coldness, simply as a fact, the kind that lands and sits and requires no particular response. The Duchess and Edward, mother and son, the same nod, the same deep reluctance to manage something once it had been said clearly enough. It was not forgiveness. It was not absolution of anything. It was just a fact about what people were made of and where they came from. She filed it. The Thursday lunch that week was the same as every Thursday lunch, 14 people, the good table, the spring light through the tall windows doing its best work. Catherine sat at her end. She talked to Lady Forsyth about the county magistrate's appointment, which was upcoming and about which Lady Forsyth had strong and well-reasoned opinions. She talked to Mrs. Alderton about her niece, whose situation had, apparently, resolved itself favorably. The husband in question had turned out to be, Mrs. Alderton said with satisfaction, more sensible than expected, which is the most one can generally hope for. She talked to the Reverend Howell's wife about the Church Restoration Fund, which was still a going concern and toward which Catherine had, quietly and without announcement, made a contribution in the autumn. She ate. She listened. She was warm and competent and entirely present in the room. At the other end of the table, the Duchess was exactly the same. They did not talk to each other during the lunch. They rarely did. The geometry of the table made it unnecessary, and there was between them a kind of functional understanding that required no conversation to maintain. Not peace exactly, not warmth. Something more like a clear view of the other's position, an acknowledgement without ceremony of where things stood. The Duchess would not change. Catherine had understood this early and had stopped expecting it. A woman who had run a house for 30 years on custom and warmth and the patient erosion of everyone around her did not, at 61, become a different person. She adapted. She managed. She found the new parameters and operated within them with the same skilled efficiency she had always operated with. But the parameters were different now, and they were not going to change back. After the guests had gone and the table had been cleared and the house had settled into the particular quiet of a Thursday afternoon, that specific post-lunch quiet, warm and slightly loose, the quiet of an occasion that has run its course, Catherine went upstairs to the correspondence room. She sat at the desk. She took out Emma's letter and read it one more time. Perhaps there is something about South Walls. She looked at the letter for a while. Then she took out a piece of paper and wrote, "Dear Emma, I am coming to visit on Friday if that suits you. Not for anything in particular, just to visit. The sweet peas are doing well." See, she folded it, addressed it, left it on the stack for the afternoon post. Then she opened the household accounts, the genuine ones, the ones that had been in her management since October, which were in considerably better order than they had been when she took them on, and which she intended to keep in good order because the alternative was unthinkable, and she began to work. She was still working when Edward appeared in the doorway at 4:30. He was in his coat. He had been out on the estate for most of the afternoon, which he did on Thursdays when the weather allowed, a habit that had developed over the winter as he had taken back, gradually and without announcement, the management of things he had been letting slide for years. He had the look of a man who has been outside in good air and is bringing some of it in with him. He looked at her at the desk. He said, "Mrs. Holt says the mason from the next county will come next month about the ice house." "Good," Catherine said. "The south wall of it has a crack that's been there since I arrived. It wants seeing to before next winter." "I'll tell her to confirm it." He paused. "Are you coming down for tea?" "In a minute," she said. He didn't leave. She looked up. He was looking at her with the full weight attention still after a year the same weight. She had wondered in the early months whether it would diminish with familiarity, whether the sustained focus would settle into something less intense, the way new things settle. It had not. It had simply become his, the way he looked at things that mattered to him. It had always been there in the ledgers, in the estate, in the management of everything he had let himself care about. She had simply, over the course of a year, become something he let himself care about. She thought, I did not expect to be happy. She thought I expected to be competent. I expected to be effective. I expected to build something real and hold it and not be worn smooth. She thought, I did not expect this. What? She said. Nothing, he said, just looking. She looked back at him for a moment. She thought about a carriage on a February morning and scissors and a mirror and a decision made before the day had properly begun. She thought about 14 people at a table and 4 seconds of silence and Mrs. Alderton's real smile. She thought about Emma's notebook and the solicitor's documents and a man standing in an entrance hall learning to look at people instead of rooms. She thought about sweet peas along a south wall. Go and tell Mrs. Holt about the mason, she said. I'll be down in 5 minutes. He nodded. He went. She turned back to the accounts. She worked for 5 more minutes precisely. She was always precise. And then she closed the ledger and took off her reading glasses and went downstairs for tea. The Duchess was already there. She was sitting in her usual chair, the one by the fire, the one she had sat in for 30 years, and she was pouring the tea herself, the way she always did, with the ease of someone for whom this is simply what is done and has always been done and requires no comment. She looked up when Catherine came in. You've been in the correspondence room, she said. Yes, Catherine said. The accounts? Yes. The Duchess handed her a cup, correct temperature, the right amount of milk, which the Duchess knew because she had been paying attention for a year, in the way she paid attention to everything. They're in good order, she said, not a question. Yes, Catherine said, a pause. Good, the Duchess said. She picked up her own cup. Catherine sat down in the chair across from her, not the Duchess's chair, not the furthest one, the one in between, the middle ground. The place she had chosen in the first weeks because it was neither capitulation nor confrontation, and which had become, over time, simply where she sat. Edward came in. He sat beside Catherine with the ease of a man who knows where he is in a room. The fire did its work. Outside, the spring evening was beginning its slow gold descent, the light changing the way it does in April, reluctant to go, finding new angles, holding on. No one said anything for a while. It was not the silence of distance. It was not the silence of managed surfaces and careful performances and 30 years of custom holding everything in place. It was the silence of 3 people in a room that knows who it belongs to. That night Catherine sat at the writing desk in the correspondence room, her room, with the morning light in the east window and the household ledgers on the shelf, and the copy of Emma's notebook in the drawer, and the certified estate documents in the folder beside it. And she opened the journal she had kept since the morning of the scissors. She had not written in it for some time. Not because nothing had happened, a great deal had happened, but because the things that were happening had stopped needing to be recorded as evidence and had started simply being her life. And her life did not need a journal the way a campaign needs notes. She opened it to the first page. She had written on the morning of the scissors, before the carriage, before the church, information is the beginning of everything. I am going to start collecting it. She read it. She thought about everything that had followed that sentence, the 14 people and the 7 faces and Emma's cottage and the solicitor's office and the morning in the drawing room and the 4 seconds of silence and Mrs. Alderton's real smile. She thought about a year of building. She turned to a new page. She wrote, the sweet peas are doing well. She looked at it. She added, the house is ours. The accounts are in order. Emma has a garden. She looked at that too. Then she wrote smaller below the rest, the thing she had not allowed herself to write until she was certain it was true. I did not expect to be happy. I am. She closed the journal. She sat for a while in the quiet of the correspondence room with the spring evening coming through the window, and the house settled around her, warm in the rooms that had once been managed, full in the spaces that had once been carefully controlled, alive in the way a house is alive when the people in it are actually present to each other. She thought about Catherine Hale standing in front of a mirror on a February morning with her hair cut ragged and a decision forming. She thought, you couldn't have known. She thought, but you were right. She thought it was the beginning. In the East Wing, the Duchess sat in her sitting room with her correspondence, and her 30 years of knowing exactly how to occupy a house, and the new and unfamiliar experience of occupying only a portion of it. She was not happy about this. But she was, in the way of a woman who has survived a great many things by being honest with herself about the things she cannot change, honest about it. The girl had the documents. The girl had the accounts. The girl had the house. The girl had, it had to be admitted, sitting alone in the East Wing on a Thursday evening with the spring coming through the window. The Duchess drank her tea. She thought about the morning of the scissors, the smile, the warmth, the 2 minutes. She thought about Catherine's face in the mirror. She had seen it, the fraction of a second before she turned away. Had seen it and had thought, she is afraid. She had been wrong. She had been wrong about that, and about the carriage, and about the 14 people, and about the morning of the documents. She had been wrong in the specific and unfamiliar way about almost everything she had assumed about this particular girl. She sat with this. She was not a woman who admitted error easily. But she was tonight alone in the East Wing with the spring evening outside and the house warm and full in the way it had not been warm and full in a very long time. And there was no one to perform for, and the performance was, she found, suddenly very tiring. She set down her cup. She thought. She fixed the house. Not the accounts, not the management, not the authority. The house itself, the actual temperature of it, the way it felt when you walked through it. Something had been different for months, something she had noticed and not acknowledged, a warmth in the rooms, a presence, a sense of the house being inhabited rather than managed. She fixed it, the Duchess thought, and she didn't do it by destroying anything. She had expected destruction. She had expected anger, aggression, the blunt use of legal authority the moment the documents were cited. She had been prepared for it, had been braced for it, had known it was coming and had organized herself to survive it. It had not come. Instead, a question about Mason's rates at a Thursday lunch, a morning call, 4 seconds of silence. The house, gradually and without theater, becoming different. She didn't need to destroy anything, the Duchess thought. She just built something else. She sat with this for a while. She did not feel warm about it. But she felt, and this was the thing she would not tell anyone, would not perform or acknowledge or allow to become a story, something that was, she thought, in the vicinity of respect. Very reluctant respect, but respect nonetheless. She finished her tea. She went to bed. In the kitchen, Mrs. Beale put out the last lamp and took stock of the larder for the morning, and thought about nothing in particular except that the house had been full today and would be full tomorrow. And that was, as far as she was concerned, the correct state of things. Peter, who was 15 now, and taller than anyone had expected, and had recently been moved from hall boy to footman because Mrs. Holt had said he was ready and he was, had left his boots by the kitchen door in the wrong place for the 3rd time this week. Mrs. Beale moved them to the right place without comment. This was the relationship she had with Peter, which worked very well for both of them. She turned out the last lamp. She went upstairs. In the small sitting room at the end of the east corridor, the room where Catherine had first found Mrs. Webb, which was still Mrs. Webb's room, and had been made slightly more comfortable over the winter with a better chair and a lamp that worked properly. Mrs. Webb sat by the window in the last of the evening light with her mending, and thought about 12 years. She thought about Emma in gray at an altar. She thought about a woman who had come to a church with her head up. She thought about the letter she would write to Emma tomorrow, the weekly letter which she had been writing for 11 years and intended to continue writing, because Emma was 3 miles away and 3 miles was too close to be out of touch and too far to visit every week. She thought about what to say. She thought, the house is well. She thought, I think you can stop worrying about the house. She set down her mending. She looked out the window at the dark grounds, the elm trees, the park, the south gate at the far edge where the path through to Linton began. 3 miles of dark between here and there, clear enough on a clear night to see lights in both directions. She thought, she did it. Not triumphantly, quietly, with the satisfaction of someone who has been patient for a very long time and has been in the end correct. She did it. She picked up her mending. She finished the seam. She went to bed. Catherine Hale had stood in front of a mirror on a February morning and made a decision. Not the decision that fear would have made. Not the decision that pride would have made. The decision that information required. She had gone to the church with her head up. She had learned the ground. She had built the walls. She had put the roof on. And then she had simply lived in the house. Which was, it turned out, the hardest part and the best part and the part that no one can do for you. You have to do it yourself, on your own terms with your head up. That is the whole of it. That is everything. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. If you enjoyed one of our stories, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you'd like to support the channel, you can join as a member or send a super thanks or super chat. Your support helps us continue creating more stories like this. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories.